Good morning, colleagues. Good morning and welcome to this webinar discussion on the theme, Reintroducing Sexual Exploitation of Children as one of the worst forms of child labor, hosted by the University of KwaZulu-Natal School of Law in collaboration with Ter des Hommes of the Netherlands. My name is Janine Hicks and I am a lecturer at the School of Law. We are hosting this webinar under the auspices of one of the research interest groups within the School of Law, the Navi Pillay Research Group. I'm sure you are familiar with the legacy and the work of this alumna of ours, Judge Navi Pillay, the former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and a judge on the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, as well as the International Criminal Court. Within the Navi Pillay Research Interest Group, we address through research and policy advocacy towards law reform, critical emergent issues of race, class, gender, and disability. So the theme for today's webinar resonates well with the work of our research group. This webinar takes place unofficially, almost as a form of ambush or protest, on the margins of the International Labour Organization conference taking place in Durban this week on the topic of child labor. Activists and NGOs in this sector are appalled at the exclusion and the non-recognition of the sexual exploitation of children as one of the worst forms of child labor, and the impact such exclusion and non-recognition has on this most vulnerable of an already vulnerable category of persons. So we are delighted to draw on the insight and expertise of panelists who will be introduced to you. And we're particularly delighted to be able to share this platform with youth advocates and activists from Kenya, from India, the Philippines, and South Africa. So I take pleasure in introducing to you a colleague of mine from the School of Law, a fellow member of our research interest group, and currently the acting dean of the School of Law, Mr. Adrian Bellinger, who will provide you with a welcome address. So on that note, welcome everybody from me, and may you enjoy fruitful and positive deliberations. Mr. Bellinger, over to you.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Dr. Hicks. Welcome everybody to this webinar. I had a couple of things I wanted to point out to you, but I'm quite grateful to Janine for having covered most of them. So it really just falls to me to say, just to welcome you. I do want to just make a quick note of the fact that what we're dealing with today is the intersection of two things. That's the intersection of two things which in their own right are both heinous crimes. And I'm talking about child labor as well as sexual exploitation. And in fact, when I was thinking about this, the descriptor crimes doesn't really capture the moral depravity that's inherent in both of these things. So this kind of thing pushes us to be more colloquial and less official. It pushes every button I have. And I trust that it pushes yours too, which is why you've joined today and why we have seen such a tremendous amount of effort that's been put into making this webinar happen. Unfortunately, it's clear that some people don't think that way. And so that's why, to echo Janine's welcome, I'm pleased to welcome you to something that is taking place outside of the official fora in the hopes that we can highlight and spotlight this and perhaps drive some form of change. So I think we have to be commended on everybody who's put this together, and I hope that you, in participating in it, are going to lend your voice to the change that we're seeking to make. Just as a quick note, and this is obviously something that lawyers have paid attention to in the past, and it's probably one of the lawyers' mantras, is you can't fix something if you deny its existence. And so this is UKZN and Ter des Hommes, Netherlands, are seeking to push for the adoption of a resolution that will hopefully facilitate discussion on this topic and bring something sort of targeted and perhaps sustainable interventions in this area. So that's what makes this morning so very important. My welcome, of course, is not just to everybody who's come to see what this webinar is about and to lend their support, but it is also specifically a welcome to the people who are participating today. And so we have a whole list of panelists. We have a facilitator, Louise Mariano. So welcome, Louise. We have a whole range of panelists. I have everybody's names written down very carefully because I'm not confident my pronunciation is going to do everybody justice. Rowena Bernard, of course, a colleague of mine I know well, welcome. Magdalena Wanza, Omala Bake Ugawande, I hope I've got that right. and of course another colleague, Victoria Balgalin Fatoken. So I think that that's, I'm hoping that it's going to be a fruitful and interesting discussion. And I have a lot of faith in the people I know on that list of panels. And I, therefore, I've absolutely no doubt that the people I haven't had the pleasure of meeting will be just as good. I think we should not overlook the fact that we have participating this morning several brave voices that are going to provide direct testimony of their experience and, speaking again from a lawyer's point of view, therefore evidence of the unholy alliance I spoke of earlier. And so I hope that those voices will not go unnoticed and unheard. And that's what today is about. So it really is in their hands. And thank you and welcome everybody to what I hope is going to be a very fruitful webinar. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, both to Dr. Janine and Mr. Bellinger. All right. So before we get started, I'd like to check up on the audience. How are you doing today? Send us a quick smiley or a thumbs up if you're ready to learn and to have fruitful conversations with everyone in the panel and, of course, with everyone in the call. Amazing. I can see a lot of smileys at the moment. That's great. All right. So before we get started, I would like to introduce myself first, and then I will introduce you to the wonderful panel that we have for today. So my name is Louise, and just recently I finished studying international law here in The Hague, but I've also was grateful to have done an internship at Ter de Zom, Netherlands. So that's why I'm here today. And I'm very excited to be here. And I'm just really glad to be part of this and to have this important, and this conversation needs to happen, even if it's alongside the ILO conference that's happening in South Africa. Oh, thanks so much for all the smileys and the waves that I see in the chat. That's awesome. Let's keep this personal. Let's keep this interactive. Please just send your comments, smileys, whatever in the chat. And I'm sure all of our moderators will be happy to read them. All right, so let's get to it. We are joined today by our extraordinary panel. I'm so happy to introduce them to you to this, well, I will call it a little bit more of theoretical part when we can really learn of what sexual exploitation of children is and why it's one of the worst forms of child labor and why it's so important for us to understand this and its effects to children and why it's mostly overlooked as well, and why this is such an important thing for us to advocate for and for us to spread awareness about, because this is not something that's easily talked about, and this is not something that we can easily discuss usually, but today we have a safe space for it, and we have lots of experts that will tell us what it is, and we also have some opportunities to ask questions. So whatever you want to know and you would love to learn, please go ahead and send them in the chat. So now I'll introduce you to our first speaker, Mr. Wiener Bernard from the University of KwaZulu-Natal Law School. So Mr. Wiener will be opening today's discussion by setting the scene in terms of child labor. More specifically, she will be sharing the international and regional trends on child labor, alongside with the international and legal framework for child labor. So this will be our, basis to our discussion today on what SEC is in terms of child labor. So please, Mr. Wiener, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon also, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us on our first webinar on this particular issue. I'm going to share my screen because I have a brief presentation that I would like for you to use. If you just bear with me, I had this all set up. Here we go. Okay. I'm assuming that you can all see my screen. Correct? Okay, let's move. Okay, so this morning, I'm going to quickly and as briefly and as concisely as possible give you a perspective in terms of child labor and where the sexual exploitation of children fits in with this. So I am basically going to be doing an introduction in terms of what is child labor, the global and the regional trends based on information and data gathered from the International Labour Organization. And then I will move into the actual legal framework that regulates this critical issue. So broadly speaking, child labor there's been many attempts to define what it is. But there has not been a universal definition. But ultimately, what child labor amounts to is where children work under very hazardous working conditions. They are subjected to poor pay, or even to the extent of not receiving any income, meager working conditions, work that actually is harmful to their health, their growth, their development, as well as their mental well-being. A lot of the time, children are separated from their families. They are devoid of any meaningful educational opportunities because of the fact that they are forced into work. While I put up the slide with different images of children engaging in child labor, and I'd like for you to take a second to just look at these pictures and these images that are placed before you, and look at the nature of the work that the children are exposed to, the conditions under their work as such. Look at the age of these children and their physical development. And this is what child labor movements seek to prevent in general. It's also important to note that the Children's Rights Convention, as well as the African Charter with regards to the rights and welfare of the child, both specifically also focus on the elimination of economic exploitation of children. It's defined as an economic practice as well as a social evil. Why we call it an economic practice is because of the fact that children at a very young age have to assist with developing or contributing towards the income of the family. It's regarded as a social evil because of the harmful nature of the work and the dangers that are associated with the work that's performed by the child itself. So it's also important to distinguish between what is considered child work and child labor. Child labor, as I've indicated, is harmful to the child, whereas child work, on the other hand, in many of our societies and countries, consider it as important to the development of the child. It is considered as being beneficial if it provides the child with relevant work experience, accountability, and responsibility. These kinds of work can involve working on a farm or assisting with household chores, but basically work that's considered helpful to the child. So I put up some slides here, and I want to quickly show you the recent trends at an international level and at a regional level. So on this particular slide, it is the global trends with regards to child labor from 2000 to 2020. And you will notice that there is a downward projectivity with regards to this until we get to 2016, where suddenly there's a slight increase in child labor. And you'll notice that it jumps from 151 million to 160 million. At a regional level, you will notice that it's the ILO divides it into 3 sub-regions, which is the Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia and the Pacific region, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean. In Asia and the Pacific region, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean region, you'll notice that there has been a steady decline in child labor. Whereas in Sub-Saharan Africa, from 2012, you'll notice that there is a steady incline in this. Some of the reasons for this incline and increase in Sub-Saharan Africa has been because of the fact that this particular region has a majority of fragile and conflict-affected countries. And in Africa alone, we have at least 39% of the world's refugees, asylum seekers, stateless people, and that is what actually contributes to the high levels. When we look at Sub-Saharan Africa itself, with regards to the age category of children who are engaged in labor, you'll notice that there is a 9.7% children who are in the age categories of 5 to 11 who are engaged in child labor. Now, this is exceptionally problematic, given that this age category of children should not be working at all. Whereas children in the age category of 15 to 17 has a 9.5% rate, should actually be higher, because this is where children can actually work within the legal limits. At a global level, the situation is the opposite, where the percentage is higher in the higher age category and lower in the ages 5 to 11. Then the last point that I want to make is with regards to gender division in the age categories 5 to 17. You will notice that there seems to be a lower number of girl children who are involved in work. And that is because of the definition of child labor, which does not include household chores in here. So for the first time in 2020, the ILO included household chores as a part of the definition. And when this was done, there was an immediate increase in the number of girl children who are involved in child labor. So moving on to the international and regional framework, I'm going to be focusing on some of the conventions of the ILO, as well as the Children's Rights Convention and the African Charter. So the minimum age convention and the minimum age recommendation are generally read together because it regulates the minimum age of employment in work generally. It classifies light work as well as hazardous and vocational training. The purpose of this convention is for members to adopt national policy which are designed specifically to abolish child labor and to progressively increase the age of employment with regards to work. By the 1990s, the ILO shifted its attention from eliminating or regulating and abolishing child labor to the elimination of the worst forms of child labor, as children were exposed to catastrophic abuse and violations of their rights. The categories or the activities listed in the worst forms of child labor are generally criminal activities that are related specifically to the sale and trafficking of children, the economic exploitation of children through prostitution and pornography, as well as military recruitment of children. Now, in terms of going back quickly to the minimum age employment, I draw your attention to Article 2.3, which specifically states that children under the age of 15 should not be employed. And if such child is also required to attend compulsory education, this particular child should not be engaging in any form of work, whether it is harmful or helpful, it's irrespective as such. So what this particular section or article does is link the minimum age of employment to a child's right to education, which is also enunciated in section 28, article 28 of the Children's Rights Convention, as well as article 11.3 of the African Charter, which places an obligation on member states to ensure that education is in fact made compulsory and free. Okay. The problem with these conventions is that it assumes that poverty-ridden countries have the means in which to provide free and compulsory education. One further important point with the African Charter is that it goes further than the Minimum Age Convention and the Children's Rights Convention by specifically mentioning that special measures must be taken to ensure that access to education of female, gifted, and disadvantaged children, as well as pregnant girls, continue with their education, so that they are not excluded according to the African experience. So when it comes to economic exploitation, the Children's Rights Convention provides for the general right for a child to be free from economic exploitation that is harmful to their well-being. And this, however, it fails to exclude the work below a certain age because it does not prescribe a specific age for employment. Similarly, Article 15.1 of the African Charter also protects children from economic exploitation and from performing work which is hazardous or interferes with their development as such. So these instruments do place an obligation on state parties to ensure and set minimum ages for the admission of employments. But unfortunately, they do not stipulate what the prescribed age should be. Quickly focusing on light work, the Minimum Age Convention allows for children to engage in light work. Specifically, children between the ages of 13 and 15 are entitled to engage in work that is light, provided, of course, that it does not impact on the child's development. The convention also prohibits children from engaging in work which is hazardous, and the age that is stipulated in there is that of 18 years. So anyone younger than 18 years may not engage in any work that is hazardous. And now I move on to the worst forms of child labor, and specifically the focus moves on to the sexual exploitation of children. So Article 3 of the Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention sets out 4 different categories as to what is considered the worst forms of child labors, as these are considered serious human rights violation. Of particular importance is to sexual exploitation is that of the sale and trafficking of children, the engagement or the use and offering in prostitution and pornography as such. Now, these are articles A and B are considered the A, B, and C are considered the worst forms and unconditional child labor, because trying to improve them will not improve them in any particular way. So Article 3A and B of the Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention, as I said, these are activities which impact on the dignity of the child and are considered exceptionally harmful. The purpose is to prohibit, monitor, and take steps in which to eliminate the sexual exploitation of children. There are 3 obligations which are set out in the convention. The first requires member states to set clear definitions, take steps in criminal law to show the prevention, to monitor the situation and wherever necessary, come up with plans of implementation in which specific timeframes are set. And thirdly, it requires that international efforts be taken in which to fight against sexual exploitation of children. So Article 3B, Louise, sorry.
Yes, I'm very sorry, but I think we're going to the end of the time allocated, but if you can make your last point and then we'll go on to our next speaker.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm almost done actually.
Yes. Perfect.
Sorry. Okay, thanks for the reminder. So as I said to you, the sexual exploitation of child labor is considered a crime of violence, and then to legitimize any work that such as prostitution would be going against the aims of the convention. The last point, and I can make these slides available if anybody wants to see them at a later stage, is to just notify and alert you of the fact that Article 34 of the Children's Rights Convention, as well as Article 27 of the African Charter, also deals with the sexual exploitation of children and prohibits it. But unfortunately, despite the fact that we have these important instruments at a regional and international level, they lack effective implementation mechanisms. And the lack of effective and enforcement mechanisms impacts on the need for us to have greater advocacy and lobbying around these issues and more commitment in eradicating this particular issue. So from my side, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us today. And hopefully we can make a bigger difference in the future going ahead. Thank you very much. Yes. Sorry, Louise.
No worries. Thank you so much for that very informative summary, I guess, because this can be an hour or even longer conversation topic today. But fortunately, Ms. Rowena has offered to make her slides available. So if anyone is interested, then you may reach out. So thank you so much for that wonderful summary. I think it's really clear to us, the really clear message that you've given is that, there are obligations written down in stone, but the implementation is still, very low. And the implementation part is really what matters, and that's very important for us to see that message and to convey that message that the implementation part matters very, very much. Now, after we've had a very informative theoretical basis, we will now jump from theory and practice with Miss Magdalene Wanza. So Ms. Magdalene is the country manager of Terdezom Netherlands in Kenya, and she will be reminding us about exactly what sexual exploitation of children means for children and why it's a huge problem. Ms. Magdalene, please take it away.
Thank you, Lois, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Magdalene Mwoki. I work for Terre de Homes Netherlands, which is an international child rights organization focusing on preventing exploitation, removing children from exploitative situations, and supporting them so that they can develop in a safe environment. And I'm very happy and privileged to be part of this very important discussion while we're talking about sexual exploitation of children. Unfortunately, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I hope my talking points will really, you will follow and will be able to engage in the next subsequent sessions. I know my previous speakers have already talked about the conference, the global conference going on in Durban. Today is the final day of the 5th Global Conference on the elimination of child labor. And if you have managed to see all the topics of the conference, they are more on child labor in agriculture, in other sectors, and the challenge of COVID. There are thematic panels and 24-side events happening in that global conference. Yet, if you look at all the topics and the focus, we don't have a single one which is really looking at sexual exploitation of children, which is considered as the worst forms of child labor, as we've heard from Rowena, from the convention, the ILO Convention number 182. And this is actually a concern to all of us, and I'm sure all of you have joined this webinar, are keen to see how this topic is being really ignored and what we need to do to really bring it back to the agenda of the child labor discussions. The convention, as you've heard from Rowena, authoritatively outlines sale and trafficking of children, procuring children for sexual exploitation, and work carried out in circumstances which are likely to affect and harm their health, safety, and morals of children. And moving away from the convention and zooming in really on everyday practical lives of these children, we know really children are really facing it rough when it comes to sexual exploitation, and they don't really get to enjoy their freedoms as articulated in this convention. Firstly, from the experience having had operations and activities and intervention as sexual exploitation as an organization, we see that sexual exploitation of children has really tremendous impact on children, which are short-term and long-term, and really affect the emotional. I know my previous speaker also mentioned the emotional, the physical, and really for children to get out of those traumatic experiences as a result of sexual exploitation of sexual exploitation of children really takes a long time. And we really need a very integrated intervention in terms of helping them to get back to their normal lives. At Teredes Homes, Netherlands, we look at sexual exploitation in the face of three types. Commercial sexual exploitation of children, that is one type we look into, which is a form of sexual exploitation where the focus is specifically on money. And often there's a link to organized crime. And I would give you maybe cite some examples, although we'll also have to hear more from our advocates, the young people who will be also speaking to us, sharing the experiences on this vice. And we've seen a lot of children even being trafficked and exploited by even organized crimes. And now with COVID, and I know all of you would agree with me, that there are much new tactics from the perpetrators who are really looking at how do we sexually exploit these children, and we don't really, at the end of the day, be caught or put into books. And from the experience that we have had, and looking at the previous reports, I think we've seen the 2020 report by the African Child Policy Forum, which is really and strongly indicating that sexual exploitation of children is a silent emergency. And we know because of the focus, the little attention being given, it is true, and we really have to say something. And I'm happy this webinar and the participants audience joining us. We should look in at the end on what we can really do together outside this webinar and in other forums with other stakeholders to address this. The other type of sexual exploitation of children we look into is the exploitation of children in travel and tourism. I know in other terminologies, and just to let all of you know, we're very keen on the terminologies we are using for this particular vice, just to be sensitive, not to cite terminologies which seem to either really liability to this child. And this actually is tourism or sexual exploitation of children, which is embedded in a context of travel, tourism, or both. And exploitation we know can happen either by foreign or local travelers and tourists. We've had this experience. I would also mention about the Kenya context, where the coastal region, which really has scenic features and characteristics, and quite a lot of foreign domestic travelers frequent that region. And children have really suffered from this exploitation. And one is because, again, of the social cultural characteristics and factors that are really pushing children towards exploitation, as well as what we've also heard about the legal provisions, the legislations, and how these laws are being implemented to ensure that children can get the support. And first and foremost, we can prevent the exploitation from happening. The third and last type of sexual exploitation, which we look into as an organization, is the online sexual exploitation of children. And this is sexual exploitation of children that has some connection to the internet. While we know that the internet has come with so many benefits, we know that it is also a risk to children at these days. And with COVID, when children were really, schools closed, children were at home, there was the new concept of online and e-learning for most children and most educational institutions. Children were exposed to these to the perpetrators of online child sexual exploitation. And I know the 2021, especially, we've seen reports indicating a very high rise in the number of children who are sexually exploited online. So these three types of sexual exploitation children are really critical, and we know that, of course, we've seen, we've heard about the laws. We are also discussing about this because then we don't feel as this is being given the attention it requires. It is the worst forms of child labor, but most of the routine interventions globally do not really provide adequate responses to children who are victims of sexual exploitation of children. We feel that we need to really take back SEC in the global child labor discussions. First of all, because from what we have seen and what we know in practice, it has never been taken at the front, at the center of our interventions. And looking at some of the practices and promising approaches that we feel could also be brought on board. And I know we saw the last statement from Rowena was bringing everybody on board, because this is a very complex exploitation, and we need to bring on board all stakeholders. We need to bring on board all disciplines so that we can look into this. And that is why we really are keen to have this kind of discussion and be able to bring everyone on board. I would also talk about the child participation, because I know every time we design projects, we design interventions, we tend to ignore the voices of children. How do we incorporate children's voices into this discussion and even into all the interventions and the response, which is very powerful? And that's why I also said in the ongoing conference, we saw concerned, because we haven't seen any child or voices of children who have history with the sexual exploitation, and we feel that is also omitted. I know there is the other thing of harmonizing of laws and legislations, which we need to look into even globally at national level and regional level, to see what are the provisions and how are they implemented and delivered, which is very critical. And maybe lastly is also the fact that these children are within communities which really holding dear to some of their cultural practices, social norms. How do we trigger some conversations with communities and just ensuring that the processes are community-led, to ensure that they adopt positive norms which are really helping and preventing children from getting sexually exploited. So really looking forward, and I think we will learn more in this webinar. Thank you very much, and over to you, Lois.
Yes, thank you so much, Magdalene. I think we've all, we really value this part, because it's really, we can see what Magdalene and the colleagues from TDH can see in practice, and what's missing and what's not working. And I think that's one of the, especially child participation in conferences and webinars like this is really just key to, you know, advocating for putting a little bit more reality into the minds of lawmakers, governments, academics, just to see how it is in reality, and just so it's not so out of touch from what children actually feel and what children actually experience. And thanks so much for that insight. It really helps us to understand a little bit more how SEC actually affects children. And I'm so happy that we have our youth advocates also on the call, and I'm so excited to hear from them how it is in practice and how we can help them, or how we can pass them the microphone for them to be able to advocate for themselves. And before we turn to our youth advocates, I would like to give the floor to our advocate, Ms. Victoria Balogun Fatukun, and she will be presenting together with UKZN researcher and lecturer Omolabake Ogunwande. I've been practicing the names, and I'm really sorry if I didn't give justice to these names, but I'm just very glad that you are here to share your knowledge with us. And they will be sharing then a South African perspective on sexual exploitation of children. So please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I think I'm going to come first. Is that right, Advocate? Okay. I'm Omolabake Ogunwande. I'm a postgraduate student of UKZN, and my research is basically on the rights of children and women, on exploitation, human trafficking, and all of that. But today I'm going to talk briefly about sexual exploitation of children, SEC, the South African perspective. If we go on to think about the interpretation or definition of sexual exploitation, we should bring out the elements, the basic elements of sexual exploitation, and they are the request for sexual favors, there must be a vulnerable person, then the person who is supposed to provide the favor is in the position, a normal position, a natural position to provide the act or activity. And then, of course, the person must be somebody that is in a position. So we say that a SEC is an abuse of power. It is an attempt to abuse someone's position of vulnerability in exchange for a sexual favor. Sexual exploitation of children is the exploitation of people below the age of 18. It is requesting sexual favor from children and young person by coercion, force, or other means that is totally out of their own volition. Of course, a lot of acts have come into play that South Africa is a party to, prohibiting any kind of sexual activity of minors. That means that even if you say that you got consent of a child to have sexual activities with, it is still called statutory rape. SEC creates a culture that makes children a possession, which is close to slavery, if not slavery itself. When we look at Article 34 of the CRC, that is the Convention on Child's Rights, it provides that state parties should undertake to protect children from all forms of sexual exploitation. Like the earlier speakers, she's talked about the different types of sexual exploitation written in the laws, that they, through coercion, they could be induced to, it could be through, what's it called now? Trafficking, it could be trafficking of children, it could be coercing them to do unlawful sexual activity, it could be through by introducing them to prostitution and all whatnot. It should not, it's totally discouraged. Also, the article on welfare of children, also as in the Charter of Rights on Welfare of Children and their welfare, that talks about, also reiterates the provision of the CRC, basically in the same words, that is that the parties that are the parties, the state parties should try to undertake to protect children from all forms of sexual exploitation and abuse. Then we talk about what our major concern is today, that is the introduction of sexual abuse, that is sexual exploitation of children, to be part of the worst form of child labor. We know that sexual exploitation of children is totally a no-no. And ILO has brought up the concern, especially when we talk about, of course, sexual exploitation of children is not gender sensitive. Young boys and girls are also partakers of the menace. So now, with the introduction of the elimination of the worst form of child labor, we were able to identify that there are some labor that we think are so simple and natural that will not be reported because it comes naturally, and people, it's been going on for so long that even women at home believe that, okay, like introducing a child, that, okay, this is a job for you to do, and maybe the boys are exempted from such, but they go through a lot of hard labor even at home. And you think the child believes that he or she is doing it for the benefit of the family, which is not right. Like a member of the family, maybe member of the family doesn't have to be a parent, doesn't have to be a direct parent. We say, okay, if you send me pictures of your breast or something, then I would give you money to send your brother to school or things like that. Those are worst form of child labor. Then coming to South Africa. South Africa has domesticated a lot of those laws protecting the rights of children. In the Convention of Rights of the Child, the optional protocols on sales of children into prostitution, and then the African Charter on the welfare of the child. South Africa has been there to do those things, and we are hoping it gets better. However, South Africa, to an extent, has some other, some culture that are still in place, that has not pushed out the elements of child sexual exploitation. It has not totally pushed it out, because those elements, those cultures have not been totally eradicated. Though with the Child Rights Act, the Sexual Offences Act, the Trafficking in Persons Act, Child Justice Act, it has really showed that South Africa is ready to let these things out of the bag and let everybody know that it is a wrong thing to do. And to help the children to properly develop, we need to totally eradicate those things from the society. There are some trends that are still prevalent in the South African society, notwithstanding the laws already put in place to eradicate such, like the act of sexual grooming, utwala, sexting, or let me say, anyway, let me just talk about the sexual grooming first. The sexual grooming is about you introducing, or rather they introducing a child from even being a baby to tell you that you need to know that, oh, you're going to be doing this and that when you get to your husband's house. You are going to be cleaning, you are going to be washing, you are going to be, you know, and then the sexual part of it, telling you that, okay, at the age of 5, the girl already knows that she's going to do this, and then by 12, she's already married. By 12, she's already married. That is sexual grooming. But utwala is more like they adopt a child from a parent's house. They adopt a child to a man's house, even as tender as age 12. Most of the time, the parents of the girl child knows about it. They say, okay, you're going to, you know, the man keeps bringing them gifts, and when the time comes, she's grabbed and then she's raped. Of course, even if she does get married, there's no consent that would come from a child that is between 12 and 15. So that is a criminal offense, if you allow me to say. It should be totally eradicated. Though there are some pros and cons on the culture, because I've read a little bit about it, and there are some things that shouldn't have been that are, because some are raped and then returned back to their parents' house, or rather pushed out. They won't be able to go back to their parents' house because they believe they are leftover of somebody. They won't be able to go back. So we should be able to groom our children to the age they will be able to make their decisions, whether to marry that man or even to marry at all.
Yes.
Next thing is
I'm sorry. This is really like an important conversation, and it's really powerful, Omolabake, but I think I would have to give a little bit time as well to our advocate, Victoria Balogun, to share a few short words. We're running a little bit out of schedule, but I hope it's okay. And so we also would like to give some time to Victoria to share her presentation.
Yes, advocates, please, you can come in. Thank you.
You're muted, Victoria. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Am I fine now? Thank you.
Yes,
so sorry about that.
Yeah,
thank you. I'm not even sure how many minutes I've got left.
Really short.
Oh, really short. Okay. Okay. So thank you first of all for affording me the opportunity to do this presentation. I am willing to make the short slides that I've got available to the audience. So basically, I was supposed to speak on the conceptualization of the South African or SEC in the South African context and looking at the framework. Sorry, I feel like I have to like rush a little bit. Okay, so SEC over and over again, well, all the presenters that I've spoken have already established the fact that this is the worst form of child labor. So I don't really have to beat around the bush there. It is critical that we are having this conversation at this particular time, because there is no better time than this particular time that we're talking about this. And I am also happy that Magdalene was able to talk about the fact that we need to look at the new trends through which sexual exploitation of children is actually being executed. We've seen what the law says, or the global perspective or agreement, or how we're supposed to be responding to how children are protected from harm, etc. I mean, of course, but is that what is happening? This is not what we are seeing. And this is creating a very big problem, because mentally, physically, emotionally, economically, even psychosocially, children are just not being able to be children anymore. So South Africa is not immune, and I want us to understand that. I'm glad we've got participants from all over the world. So we all know that this is a problem that we have to collectively address. South Africa is not immune to this, I will call it a virus that is impacting on children. We have South Africa as, of course, ratified a series of conventions and treaties. You've seen that from previous presenters, and they have already spoken about that. So domestically, our constitution, the 1996 constitution, expressly and implicitly recognizes the right to dignity for each and every person in the country. And this goes also with children. And when we talk about sex, certainly it erodes. This is one of the worst crimes that can be committed against a child, because it takes away their dignity. Of course, we're still going to talk about the right to health, life, etc. But their dignity is totally gone. So the Constitution itself, it's like that particular provision is, that right is taken away from a child. Then in 2013, South Africa actually ratified the Prevention on Combating what is called Combating Trafficking in Persons Act. And this in chapter 1, in section 1, we could see that this legislation actually fortifies or supports or builds on the criminal law, Sexual and Offences Related Amendment Act, of course, by also equally condemning any sexual abuse that could be committed against a child, and expressly defining and condemning sexual exploitation. Now, this provision is quite important because the same piece of legislation also builds on the Children's Act, which of course condemned child labor and any form of, exploitation or abuse that will come to the child. Now, syndicates are quite tactful in the way they do their things, because they find a way around how they will probably beat the system. I'm not sure, I thought I was sharing. I'm not sure if I'm sharing anymore. How they will beat the system. And if this is not done, then they find other ways to get across to the people. I'm so sorry. I thought I was actually sharing my screen. I wanted to just display that a little bit. So I was talking about the legislations. Oh, geez. Okay, so I have talked about the Constitution, the Packetip, of course, expressly prohibited sexual exploitation of children, and labor. That's of course talking about child labor also, and building on the the Children's Act vis-a-vis the Sexual Criminal Law, Sexual Offences Act. And these are very, very crucial. So for me, I would say that if we're talking about whether South Africa has enough legal framework on protecting children, it does. The problem, however, could come to is the implementation up to standard. Are we getting enough from the resources that we already have on ground? So for instance, South Africa, we have different organizations working with the different state departments that have been put together to, of course, ameliorate any kind of bad or impactful, unhealthy, including exploitative activities or things that could happen to children. So we've got like child welfare, the Departments of Social Development, Childline, etc. However, we still have a situation whereby children are still highly exploited. And this might not necessarily be what we're looking at. So if we look at a little bit of statistics in between 2012 and 2016, a major project was done, and they found that approximately 41,583 people, ladies or women, basically complained about being raped. Out of this percentage were a fraction of men, but they refused to report it between 2018 and 2019. Then come 2016, we had about 40% of young people who have experienced some kind of sexual and physical and emotional abuse. Come 2012, in 2012, there was, and this still remains one of the most comprehensive projects or research that's been done on sexual abuse in South Africa. And we're hoping, actually, one of my recommendations will be that we still need something to mimic that, or something that will improve that. In 2012, the Optimus report, which is still, of course, one of the most relevant right now, reported that 44.6% of the child homicides in South Africa is actually related to sexual abuse. So the bulk of people, or girls, or maybe some boys, also because boys do not talk. Men do not want to talk about it. Even when they're being exploited, they just have this culture of not talking about it. Maybe it's societal, we don't know. And we need to know, because if 46% are committing, of homicide cases is related to some kind of direct or indirect sexual abuse or assault or exploitation, then it means that we've got serious problems in our hands in South Africa. And it doesn't matter how much we want to say we're fine, we are not really fine. And I'm looking at the Childline report between January 20, this is supposed to be 20, okay, I'm just going to round up now.
Yes.
2022, sorry, just give me a minute. And then they actually recorded that this was this year, like 22% of all the cases they got that was reported to them was actually on sexual abuse. If you look at that, it's actually quite high. And of course, we see the percentage, emotional abuse, physical abuse, etc. And all this actually are quite concerning, because at the end of the day, the constant and repeated exploitation of children in every possible way, whether it's been doing favors, grooming, trafficking, etc., all comes back to us having a serious problem in our hands, which we have to deal with. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Advocate Victoria. I think you've really gave us so much powerful statements with regards to us just looking at the problem, not only looking, but also collectively doing something, not only in South Africa, of course, but all around the world. I think it's indeed, I agree with what you said. It is indeed a virus that we have to keep on fighting against. And I'm sure I can speak for all of our viewers and all of our advocates when I say thank you very much for the wonderful panelists for all their valuable insights that you've shared with us today. I'm certain that we've all learned something new about about sexual exploitation of children and child labor from both a theoretical and practical perspective. I'd like to encourage our audience to send out their questions in the Q&A chat. Our panelists will be ready to answer these questions via the chat or later in our Q&A session. I think that talking about SEC, hearing our panelists, it can be a little bit heavy and it may take a toll on your mental health. So if you need to, please do take a break. And I'd also like to check up on our wonderful audience at this time. Send like a sign, a thumbs up, a smiley if you're ready to hear from our youth advocates, which we are going to now. Yes, so before we open up the discussion with our young advocates, I can see a lot of thanks to our panelists and to a lot of insights in the chat as well. Please, I encourage you to read it, to engage in conversation with the panelists and the audience, because this is really important. This is a safe space and a safe moment for us to talk about sex. So now we're going to our discussion with our youth advocates. But before we dive into this, this is really the part where we can listen to children, to their voices, to their opinions, and to ask them questions as well. In spaces and conversations like these, this is indeed where we really need children. So before we do that, I would like to ask everyone in the call to please help us keep this a safe space for the 6 youth advocates for our young advocates in this call. All of them have chosen their nicknames to protect their real identities. And they are joining us from safe spaces, and there are NGO workers who will support them with us as well with interpreting, because some of them will not be speaking in English. So please do keep that in mind. The youth advocates will not be visible on camera to make them feel more comfortable, and of course for their safety. The other thing is that they will be talking to us on behalf of children in their countries. And when I say this, please, we encourage for this session to be very interactive, but we also do not encourage anyone to share their personal stories, to personal experiences. Please keep this in mind and be respectful when you submit your comments and questions in the Q&A and in the chat box. The questions will be moderated by the moderators that are present in this call, and we will select some for the Q&A section later. But please, I encourage you to keep the session interactive if you would like. And I also just want to remind everyone to take care of yourselves. It might be heavy. If the discussion is getting too heavy, please do take a break. And to our 6 amazing youth advocates from Kenya, from the Philippines, and from India, please, you have the right people beside you to reach out. And if you need anything, please do so. For everyone else, if you want to report any safeguarding concern going on during this webinar, please use the email address that will be shared in the chat box. All right, I hope I've run through the very important instructions. And now we're going to the exciting part of this webinar, which is to talk to the youth advocates that are present in this call. So are we all excited for that? I know it's not in person, so I cannot hear you clapping or smiling, but I will assume that you are very happy and excited to talk to our youth advocates. Right, so let's get into discussion. First up, we have our youth advocates from Kenya. We have Maggie and Helena, and they are with Miss Dorcas Mwachi from NAYA, the Network for Adolescent and Youth of Africa. Maggie and Helena, welcome. How are you doing today?
Very good, and you?
Yes, great. I can hear an echo. So I think one should mute. Yes, amazing. All right, so good to hear that you're doing well. We are very, very happy to have you in this call. So we have this discussion today because, as our speakers mentioned in the beginning, there's this huge international child labor conference that's happening in Durban in South Africa. And the problem is that, as Magdalene very clearly mentioned, is that it's barely in the agenda, if it even is in the agenda. So there's not much recognition that sexual exploitation of children is one of the worst forms of child labor. So the question for you, Maggie, you ready for it? Is, Maggie, most of us have never really been children in Kenya. I think we've all have our own places where we have been children or we've had our childhood. So I think this is really a really great question for you. So please fill us in, how big is the problem of sexual exploitation of children in Kenya? So how big is that problem in your country, Maggie?
Okay, good morning.
Hey.
I'm Maggie, a youth advocate.
Yes. No worries. This
Maggie,
sounds
a youth advocate from Kenya, working under a program of She Leads, implemented by the Network for Adolescents and Youth of Africa, and funded by the Teredes Homes. We sensitize forums in communities on sexual exploitation and that we have on children. And from my side, I have seen sexual exploitation is one of the worst forms of child labor, and it's something that needs to be looked upon. And some of the major issues leading to this sexual exploitation, we have parent negligence. This comes when parents have transferred the burden of parenting to children, and in return to most of these children, especially the girls, end up being sexually exploited. And for instances, we might have some parents sell local brews, and they use their children as waiters. Reason being, they bring more clients, and this leads them to be sexually exploited, and it can also lead to prostitution of these girls. And another also issue, we have negative social norms and cultural practices. And most of our communities from my country have social norms that do not favor the girl child, and priorities are given to the boy child. And some parents prefer marrying young girls to be, let's say, rich guys or older men to get the dowry, to use the dowry as their financial support. And some parents even end up giving away the girls in return to get the financial support to feed the family. And we also have poverty. Due to high poverty level in our country, some parents have their children to contribute to the family expenses. Like most parents, when asked about this, they feel like more people should come on board and help support the family without considering their age. And this brings to the boys going along at the beach, becoming beach boys. They do exchange for sex and money so that they can feed the family. Or girls end up also going with local people to get family to, or foreigners, in order to feed the family. And we also have social media platforms. We have instances where it can be either parents or relatives or strangers. They manipulate the children by engaging them to porn for money. They take, like, for example, they might take the nude photos to sell them, since it's known like child pornography has market. So, and on to another issue, we also have peer pressure. This comes, for instance, when we have a 17-year-old boy who has dropped out of school, and let's say has a smartphone and got some riches, and then is seen by another 17-year-old boy who is in school. So the curiosity builds in between, and he is maybe told these are some ways, and some ways also are one of the sexual ways, and the boy end up in those ways which can be sexually exploited. And some have been already mentioned by Madam Magdalene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing your insight and the point of view of Kenyan children on this topic. I think it's very important that you've mentioned the different ways that, you know, SEC manifests in your country. And I think it's really important for us, the advocates, the lawmakers, and everyone essentially in this webinar to just even catch a glimpse of, you know, how big the problem of SEC is and how it manifests in every aspect of a child's life. So thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing that with us. So during my studies and my time as an intern at Terdazam, I've seen that Kenya actually have some really strong laws in place against SEC. So my next question is for our youth advocate, Helena. Hi, Helena. I'm wondering if these laws that are in place in Kenya, these policies, are they actually, put into practice? Are they actually being used? Are they actually being implemented? Especially from a child's perspective, from your point of view, Helena.
Okay. I'm Helena, a girl advocate under the organization of She Leads. In Kenya, the program is implemented by Network of Adolescents and Youth of Africa and funded by Terre des Hommes. In the program, we conduct community sensitization on different issues. I'm very happy to participate in this meeting and present the other youth and children in Kenya. Kenya is a country located in East Africa and well known for its vast wildlife preserves. According to the last census conducted in 2020, the population in Kenya was estimated at 53.7 million and 12.7 being adolescents. Consequently, Kenya is facing challenges in covering gaps between law and implementation, between words and action, and despite the efforts, there have been gaps. Some of the gaps are delay in finalizing the review of children acts, like for example, the act in 2001. Also, there have been allocation of resources to support children's services at the national and local level, delay in the operationalization of the National Assistance Trust Fund for victims of trafficking in persons and the level of its funding. Also, there have been lack of consolidation and credible data on the state of child trafficking. Due to lack of implementation, there has been lack of awareness of sexual exploitation as criminal offense and intensifies barriers to institution collaboration. Due to negative social norms and cultural practices, crimes of sexual exploitation are not reported in small rural communities because of lack of identification and limited prosecution of perpetration. This contributing to ongoing sexual exploitation. Also, due to poverty, many parents are not able to support and provide for their children. This makes teens to look for money in order they can provide for their families and their own consumption. When children try seeking for help, they undergo typical experience, like for example, they don't receive adequate services such as counseling and also legal support to ensure their full recovery. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Helena. I think this is really valuable. This is such a valuable insight that you've given to us because, as we all know, of course, implementation is lacking in every legal system in the world. We've heard it from Ms. Rowena, we've heard it from Ms. Magdalene, we've heard it from Ms. Victoria. And it's just great to hear this from a child's perspective as well, because this is really something that they experience, when there's delays in reviewing laws. There's also this really big hurdle of social norms and cultural practice. And this is why it's so important for us to raise their voices, to raise their concerns, and to talk about these issues in a community level, in the family level, and even in the peer level, just because talking about it will start to spark something and for us to collectively act on the problem. Thank you so much again to our to Helena and to Maggie. And I have a last question, and either one of you may respond. So if there is such a gap between, you know, these laws, these policies that you have in place in Kenya, and, you know, the real experiences of children, if there was, you know, one change that you could ask for, and, you know, this change would happen in a click, what would it be? What would be the change that you would ask for? So either Maggie or Helena or both, you can respond to this last question before we travel to India.
Okay, I would recommend our government to ensure the adoption, domestication, and full implementation of the county government model policy on sexual and gender-based violence, together with the national monitoring and evaluation framework by all the 47 counties in Kenya. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, that's definitely something that, you know, we can all really advocate for, is, you know, just to have a sort of cooperation between all these counties, all these countries in the world, just to have every department of the government, every branch of the government to just cooperate in this. I think that's the really key change that we all should advocate for in our own countries. And that's a really great answer. Thank you so much once again to our advocates, Maggie and Helena from Kenya. Thank you for your perspectives. And I think we've really learned such valuable insight from you. Thank you very much. So now from Kenya, we will be traveling. You will be traveling with me virtually to India, to a country that has a close bond with Durban, as I've learned yesterday, that Durban is having one of the biggest Indian populations outside of India. So I would now like to welcome our youth advocates from India. Can I still see them in this call? Nehra and Amu. Welcome to the both of you. How are you both doing? I think they are muted still. Okay, I will jump right to these two youth advocates. First of all is with Tipya Ramanjanea from the Society for Networking, Empowerment and Holistic Action. So my first question, if you are responding to me right now, you are on mute, so I cannot hear you, but I'll jump to the first question right away. And my first question is for Nehra. So, sorry. Okay, my first question is for Nehra. Now that you've just heard about Kenya, can you tell us a little bit about the sexual exploitation of children situation in India, and what it means for children in your country, and what it means to be affected by one of the worst forms of child labor? You are still on mute.
Please unmute yourself.
Yes, great.
Yes, our connection was bad.
Okay, would you... Sorry?
Start from the beginning.
Yes, okay. I was welcoming our advocates, Nehra and Ambu. So welcome. How are you both doing today?
Very good.
Fine, fine.
Fine,
fine.
Yes. Awesome. So I'm going to repeat my first question for Nehra. And the first question is that I would like her to tell us about the situation of sexual exploitation of children situation in India, and what it means for children in the country, and what it means to be affected by one of the worst forms of child labor. Thank you.
I'm translating a bit in Canada. ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಇಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಬದುಕೋದು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು, ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ಶೋಷಣೆ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಹೇಗಿರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ಕೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. She is going to talk in Kannada, our South Indian language.
ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ನ್ಯಾರ. ನಾನು ಪ್ಯಾರಾಮೆಡಿಕಲ್ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಇಯರ್ ಡಿಪ್ಲೊಮಾ ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಓದ್ತಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ನನ್ನ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಹಿರಿಮಗಳಾಗಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಾನು ಕಿಶೋರಿ ಸಂಘದಲ್ಲಿ 2 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಾನು ಈ ಸಂಘದಲ್ಲಿ ಬಾಲ್ಯ ವಿವಾಹ, ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿ, ಬಾಲ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಜನರಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಮಕ್ಕಳಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾಗೃತಿ ಮೂಡಿಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದೇವೆ.
The Kishori groups, that is young adult girls group formed by an NGO, which is a partner of KZN Netherlands. And I'm one of the girls from the family who has come out to study. Right now I'm doing paramedical course.
ನಾವು ದಕ್ಷಿಣ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ 130 ಕೋಟಿ ಜನರಿದ್ದರು. 40% ಮಕ್ಕಳಿದ್ದು ಸುಮಾರು 52% ಮಕ್ಕಳು. ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷ 40 ರಿಂದ 50 ಸಾವಿರ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಣೆಯಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
We belong to a state in the down south of India. There are about 135 crores of people, that's the population, with 40% of children, that means around 53 crores, with a large majority of people and children living in rural areas. And she is emphasizing that every year around 40 to 50,000 children go missing.
ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚೆಚ್ಚು ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಮಕ್ಕಳೇ ಕಣ್ಮರೆಯಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಿಂದುಳಿದ ಜಾತಿಗಳೇ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುವುದರಿಂದ ಅವರು ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಎಂಬ ಒಂದು ಆಚರಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ಆ ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಮಾಡೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಒಳಗಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
A large proportion of people belong to let's say lower caste groups that is identified in Indian societies. In these lower caste families, girls are subjected to a system called Devadasi, which is a traditional prostitution. And girls are dedicated to this traditional prostitution and they suffer sexual abuse and sexual exploitation from childhood itself.
ಇದಲ್ಲದೆ ಬಾಲ್ಯ ವಿವಾಹದ ಮೂಲಕ ಲಕ್ಷಾಂತರ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಒಳಗಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಒಪ್ಪಿತವಲ್ಲದ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಸಹ ಈ ಅಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಬಲಿಯಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
Additionally, there are a lot of child marriages taking place. Child marriages means whether to give consent or not, you are subjected to sexual abuse every day.
ಆದರೆ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ವೇಶ್ಯಾವೃತ್ತಿಗೆ ಅಥವಾ ಸೂಳೆಗಾರಿಕೆಗೆ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ನೂ ಇರುವಂತಹ ದೇವದಾಸಿಯಂತಹ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ತೊಡಗಿಸುವುದು, ಆ ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ದುಡಿಮೆಗೆ ಕಳಿಸುವುದು, ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಮೇಲಾಗುವ ಯಾವುದೇ ದೈಹಿಕ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ನೈತಿಕ ಆಘಾತ ತೊಂದರೆ ಖಂಡಿತ ಆಗಲಾಗದು, ಒಪ್ಪಲಾಗದು.
See, there are a lot of girls who are pushed into sexual abuse or sexual exploitation, even in the so-called prostitution. But when girls are being pushed into prostitution, there is the physical, psychological exploitation of children going on. The numbers are quite a lot, where even the government doesn't have any such actual numbers of it.
ಜಾತಿ ಧರ್ಮ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಒಳಪಡಿಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
In the name of caste, in the name of religion, in the name of culture,
Sorry,
a lot of girls are being exploited.
can to the person that's translating in English, could you speak a little bit closer to the microphone if that's possible? So yes, thank you so much, because yeah, thank you. Great. Please.
Yeah, she just said that in the name of caste, in the name of religion, in the name of culture, a lot of girls are pushed into sexual abuse in India. And she just mentioned that yes, child sexual exploitation is a reality, but considering them as victims of child labor is a difficult proposition to accept. And it's a crime more than anything. So it requires immediate rescue and legal actions.
ಬಡ ಕುಟುಂಬದ ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಮಕ್ಕಳೇ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಒಳಗಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಕೆಲಸ ಕೊಡಿಸ್ತೀನಿ, ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ತೀನಿ, ಟಿವಿ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಬರೆಸ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಮೋಸ ಮಾಡುವಂತಹದ್ದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದೆ.
In the name of marriage, in the name of love, in the name of getting opportunity in films and TV serials are taken away, and so she is linking to a lot of girls, particularly adolescent girls who go missing. Large number, they will never come back, and they are sold, they are trafficked for sexual exploitation. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, thank you so much, Nehra, for your valuable insights. And it's just, with the huge amount of children that go missing in India, it's always one child already missing is already one too many. So thank you so much for sharing your valuable insight with us. I would like to move on to our second question for Amu. Thank you, Amu, for being with us today. So my question for you, Amu, is what is it like for children who have been exploited and are looking for help or support?
ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ಗತಿ ಅಂತ. ನಾನು ಕಿಶೋರ ಸಂಘದಲ್ಲಿ 3 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ನಾನು ಬಾಲ್ಯ ವಿವಾಹ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಬಾಲಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಮತ್ತೆ ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಗುಂಪು ಚರ್ಚೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಹಿಂದಿ ನಡೆದಂತ ಎಲ್ಲ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲೂ ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಪದ್ಧತಿಯನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಒಳಗಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಲು ಹಲವಾರು ರೀತಿಯ ಕಾನೂನುಗಳಿವೆ ಮತ್ತು ಕಾಯ್ದೆಗಳಿವೆ.
Youth group is the girls group for the past 3 years. I'm studying in my final year degree. The issues related to child sexual exploitation are discussed in our groups. Not only in our groups, even among our friends groups in the college, we keep talking about it. We know that there are several laws that are there to help children, to help the community. Continue.
ಕಾನೂನು ಕಾಯ್ದೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹಲವಾರು ನಿಷೇಧಗಳನ್ನು ತಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆದ್ರೆ 8 ನಿಷೇಧ ಕಾಯ್ದೆಗಳಿವೆ. ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ನಿಷೇಧ ಕಾಯ್ದೆ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಬಾಲಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ನಿಷೇಧ ಕಾಯ್ದೆ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಮಾನವ ಕಳ್ಳತನ ಸಾಗಾಣಿಕೆ ನಿಷೇಧ ಕಾಯ್ದೆ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇನ್ನೂ ಹಲವಾರು ರೀತಿಯ ಕಾಯ್ದೆಗಳಿದ್ರೂ ಸಹ ಕಾನೂನು ಕಾಲಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಯ ಶೋಷಣೆ ವಿರುದ್ಧ ಧ್ವನಿ ಎತ್ತದೆ, ಹಾಗೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಕೆಲಸ ಕಾರ್ಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತೊಡಗದೆ, ಕಾನೂನು ಕೈಗೆ ತಗೊಳ್ಳದೆ ಒಡನಾಟವಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಹಾಗೆ ಇನ್ನಿತರ ಧ್ವನಿ ವರ್ತನೆ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಆಡಂಬಿಕವಾಗಿ ಕಾನೂನು ಸಹ ಕೈಗೊಳ್ಳದಾಗಿದೆ.
Yes, it's true that there are several acts that are supporting children particularly. Let's say the Prohibition of Child Labor Act, Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, Prohibition of Trafficking, Prohibition of Child Sexual Abuse, etc. Yes, we are happy that there are so many acts, but the problem is the implementation part of it. The implementation and the people who are supposed to protect children, either in the form of police, either in the form of any other government officials, it is where they lack in terms of protection.
ಹಾಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ದುಡಿಮೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಬಾಲಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಪದ್ಧತಿ. ಬಾಲಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಜಗತ್ತಿನೆಲ್ಲೆಡೆ ಒಪ್ಪಿರುವುದು. ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ಕೆಲಸ ಅಥವಾ ದುಡಿಮೆ ಅಥವಾ ಶೋಷಣೆಗೆ ದುಡಿದಾಗ ಅವರ ದೈಹಿಕ, ಮಾನಸಿಕ, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ನೈತಿಕತೆಗೆ ಹಲವಾರು ರೀತಿಯ ಅಪಾಯಕಾರಿ ಮತ್ತು ತೊಂದರೆ ಉಂಟಾದಾಗ ಅವರ ಜೀವನ ಮತ್ತು ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಕೂಡಕ್ಕೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಅಡ್ಡಿ ಆಗುತ್ತದೆ.
we understand that child labor is a process where it obstructs a child's education, physical, mental health. And it also obstructs the person, that is a child, to grow into a proper adult.
ಹಾಗೆ ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ಅಡಿಯಾಳೆಗಳಂತೆ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವುದು ಮತ್ತು ಜೀತದಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವುದು, ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಿಂದ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಂದ ಮಾದಕ ವಸ್ತುಗಳನ್ನು ಹಾಗೆ ಚರ್ಮ ಅದೇ ಮಾಡುವುದು, ಗಣಿಗಾರಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಳಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳುವುದು, ಇದರಿಂದ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ದುಷ್ಪರಿಣಾಮಗಳು ಉಂಟಾಗ್ತವೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಸಶಸ್ತ್ರಿಗಳನ್ನು ಬಳಸುವುದರಿಂದ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಹಲವಾರು ರೀತಿಯ ತೊಂದರೆಗಳು ಉಂಟಾಗುತ್ತದೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನು ವೇಷವೃತ್ತಿಗೆ ಅಥವಾ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ನೂ ಉಳಿದಂತಹ ದೇವದಾಸಿ ಪದ್ಧತಿಗೆ ಒಳಪಡುವುದು, ಈ ಬಾಲಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಪದ್ಧತಿಗೆ ಇದು ಒಪ್ಪಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಮಕ್ಕಳ ದುಡಿಮೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಎನ್ನುವುದು ತಪ್ಪಾಗುತ್ತದೆ.
She's bringing the reference of worst form of child labor. Of course, she mentioned about various things like using children for narcotics and production and transportation of arms, etc. But she says that, well, let us recognize that children are being subjected to sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, but considering children who are subjected to sexual exploitation as child labor, that the worst form of child labor, is a bit difficult proposition for us, because they need protection, not considering as child labor.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Nera and Amu, and for the translator. It's the connection, but we've tried the best we can to hear the perspectives of the youth advocates, and I'd like to thank you both once again for your insights, for your participation, and once again, it's been highlighted that it's the implementation and it's the protection and the knowledge of actual people in power that can protect children that needs to be highlighted. Thank you so much again to our youth advocates from India. Thank you for your valuable insights. And now we're going from India to the Philippines. So finally, we come to our last two advocates, Alexa and John, from my home country, the Philippines. So they're joining us with Ms. Pamela Uy from the Bidlisio Foundation. Welcome and magandang hapon dyan sa Pilipinas, John, Alexa, and Ms. Pamela. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, hi. Hello, Louise and everyone.
Yes. All right. So since we are running a little bit behind schedule, I would like to ask John and Alexa, how are you doing today?
We're great.
We're great.
Yes, awesome. We love having you here. We love having all the 6 youth advocates here with us today. So my first question is for John. So John, could you fill us in on how big sexual exploitation of children, the issue of sex is in the Philippines?
Hi. Mayong hapon, or should I say, good afternoon. I am John from Cebu, Philippines. I am an advocate of children's rights and one of the trained youth of Bidlisio to help educate young children. The Philippines have a population of more than 110 million, and the Philippines is known as the Pearl of the Orient Seas. We are an archipelago, and I am located in the Queen City of the South, Cebu. According to the Philippine Statistics Authority, or PSA, there were 872,000 working children in 2020. 597,000, or 68.4%, were child laborers. Most working children were in the agriculture sector, services, tipsy, fishing, and unfortunately, OSEC, which is in 2019, 418,422 cyber tips were recorded. But in 2020, we have seen a 260% increase since the start of lockdown, according to United States National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In the Philippines, the poverty rate is 6.1% of the population. They live on less than $1.90 per day. 26% live on less than 3.20 per dollars, and 55.1% live on less than $5.50 per day, based on World Bank data. Moreover, because of financial constraints, children have no choice but to accept these jobs even though it's against the law. OSEC victims are misinformed that word "no touch, no harm" means that as long as the child is not touched by anyone, it is all right for the family. Besides, admittedly, unfortunately, it's a taboo to talk about this situation because victims are ashamed and scared to be bullied. That's all.
Thank you so much, John, for giving us, facts and figures and statistics on how SEC or even OSEC, online sexual exploitation of children, is such a huge problem in the Philippines. And that just the stigma, you can see like a really concrete example that John had mentioned is the no touch, no harm. It's just something that we really have to focus on and to change in communities. And thank you so much, John, for giving us that insight from your side. We really appreciate it. We're going now to question to Alexa, our other youth advocate from the Philippines. So Alexa, my question for you is, what do you think? In the Philippines, it's not really great if you are a child and you get in the wrong side of the law. So the question is, what do children think from the child's perspective? What are the reasons that children are not better protected against OSEC and SEC?
Hi there, I'm Alexa from Cebu, Philippines. Mayong hapon sa iyong tanan, or should I say good afternoon. Most of the Filipinos who are living below poverty line, which means most children are not properly cared for or guided by their parents. Most of the parents become a parent at a very young age, so they don't know or they don't have any knowledge how to raise their children. Here in the Philippines, mostly the cases take 6 to 10 years before the case is resolved. Most of the cases that involve minors or children are mixed with adult court. Some of the cases are still on process. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexa. It's really great to hear, our youth advocates sharing their experiences as children. And, for my last question for either one of you is, if you would have one message to governments about how to protect children from being exploited, what would it be?
Hello, my name is John again.
Yes.
So in my side, I would like to call out our government to improve the service for these exploited children, making it more accessible and child-friendly. I mean, the service provider should be equipped to not further inflict harm to the children victims during their dealings. For example, the way they're interviewed, it should be in a nice way and handle them appropriately. That's all.
Yes, thank you so much to our youth advocates once again. And now,
excuse me, miss.
Oh yes, go ahead, please.
Who wants to add?
Yes, please go ahead.
The government should be aware of the feelings of the exploited victims, should not be chased by the media or broadcast their bad experience. They should think of the safety of the victims first. And second, government should provide the family court or minor court. The minor should not be mixed with the other cases. And for our policymakers, please do create a policy that in line with the international policies and how to regulate internet services, service providers, and social media platforms. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great way to end the to end the session with our youth advocates. Again, we are the most thankful for the 6 of you for sharing your insights to us.
Yes, sir. Girls still want to share a few lines.
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಕಂಪ್ಲೇಂಟ್ ತಗೋಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಶ್ರೀಮಂತರ ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿಗಳು, ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳು ಅದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಗಮನ ಹರಿಸಬೇಕು. ಕಾಣೆಯಾದ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಬರೇ ಶ್ರೀಮಂತರ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಕಾಣೆಯಾದ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಹುಡುಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಆದ್ರೆ ಬಡತನದಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಕಾಣೆಯಾದ್ರೆ ಶ್ರೀಮಂತರು ಪೊಲೀಸರು ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇದು ತಲೆ ಕೆಡಿಸಿನೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಂತಹ ಕಂಪ್ಲೇಂಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು ಕೂಡ ಆ ಕಂಪ್ಲೇಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಮುಚ್ಚಾಕುವಂತ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದೆ.
In our communities, we experience when children from poor families or lower caste families go missing, there is very little attention given by the police and the law enforcement authorities to trace them. But even the children from rich families or children of politicians, children of government servants go missing, they go all the way to find them. The cases with respect to poor families when girls go missing, FIRs, that is first information report in the police station, is also not filed. So there is a lack of interest among the law enforcement authorities, also among courts, to protect the girls who are sold out, trafficked for sexual exploitation from poor families. Okay, that's it. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That's really an amazing point. I see in the chat mentioned by Joanne that it's true. Inequalities play such a huge role in, prosecuting OSEC and even just in preventing OSEC. So thank you so much for highlighting that. It's really such, something that is usually could be, that this is something that is usually overlooked, the inequalities that children face in their daily lives, and just not being able to report any of these things, not being able to get legal assistance, not being able to get, emotional and psychosocial support is just really a big part of this problem. And now I only hope that all these insights will only add to the fuel that we all share, and which is to fight for a world free of sexual exploitation of children, and to finally make a safe space for the youth advocates, such as the amazing ones that we have in this call and that we've heard today, to voice out their insights on SEC and their rights. And now, after such a valuable discussion, many of you have asked some questions in the Q&A function. Now, Dr. Walleen Holness has a message about the Q&A and the next steps. Please, Ms. Walleen.
Thank you very much, Louise. And thank you so much to our youth advocates. I think we all feel empowered by your enthusiasm that change is possible if only we are to listen to your voices today and create other opportunities to do so. Our Q&A function has been available throughout the proceedings today, and we beg your indulgence in the last few minutes that we have available. Please pose your questions in the Q&A, and those will be answered by the panelist members as they are able to do so. If you have any further questions, we are going to ask that you please email those to us. Various email addresses have been posted online and are available in our press releases as well, and we will seek to produce those answers to you as expeditiously as we can. We have taken more time today than we planned to hear from our youth advocates, and indeed we believe that that is incredibly necessary, and that we need to create more platforms with more time to hear from our youth advocates. And as a result, we are not able to facilitate the Q&As as we heard before. And then, Louise, just to advise you that at this juncture, then once you have concluded your part, I will then provide the conclusion and the resolution. Thank you.
Yes, from our side, we would like to thank everyone once again. And of course, like, we cannot express our thankfulness enough to our wonderful panelists, starting from the very first presentation until the very session with the youth advocates. Thank you so much. From our side, we are grateful to be here, and now we can, from my side, we can proceed with the resolutions and the conclusions. I'm very excited to hear the resolutions that we have today.
Thank you very much, Louise. So when this webinar was conceived, it came on the back of continued and concerted work by Terre des Hommes to address sexual exploitation of children around the world. And the countries that were represented today are only a part of the countries in which they have a footprint and continue to do so. As members of the academia, we were very excited to join in their efforts and lend our support for the voices of youth advocates. And as far as we are concerned, academia doesn't always provide with the best avenues for the voices of children and child participation to come through. The ivory towers in which we reside in the work that we do may, similarly to governmental departments, be somewhat removed or aloof from the experiences of children. And that's why this was so valuable to us and will continue to provide much space for lobbying and advocacy going forward. This is the start of a journey for our organizations, and we hope that those that were present here today will continue to take that flame forward. I'd just like to, in conclusion, touch on a few of the points that were raised by the presenters today. One of those is the issue of the root causes of sexual exploitation of children. And when we look at the criminal procedures and the criminal laws that are in place to address once sexual exploitation has happened, that is a very important part of what lawmakers and law enforcement can assist with. However, the attention to the root causes of sexual exploitation is something that everyone can address. That includes also community members and families, and of course the governments, policymakers and lawmakers involved. If we can prevent a lot of sexual exploitation from happening, then our criminal justice procedures can focus only on those that we haven't managed to prevent. And that's where we are failing a lot. So I'd like to then read to you the resolution that we have agreed to, and I'm going to share my screen. And Louise, I'm going to ask that you please just confirm that you can see it.
Yes, we can see your screen. When you click on present, it's so much better. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So collectively, on the reintroduction of sexual exploitation of children as one of the worst forms of child labor, this is what we resolve today. Recalling the purposes and the principles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the ILO Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention, and the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and bearing in mind the primary responsibilities under the relevant conventions for the protection of children against every form of exploitation, especially sexual exploitation of children or abuse for children's rights and well-being. Collectively, we echo the voices of children in expressing deep concern about the seriousness and the continued sexual exploitation of children, which includes commercial and online sexual exploitation, as well as travel and tourism exploitation, and the worrying allegations of infringements of children's rights and the insufficient engagement of duty bearers in implementation of the Convention number 182 and the protection of children against the worst forms of child labor. Focusing on promoting children's rights, first and foremost, considering that sexual exploitation is a worst form of child labor, yet it is not addressed in child labor discussions, considering that child participation is a right, yet young voices are not heard in discussions on sexual exploitation of children, recalling the primary responsibility of the SEC webinar organizers, that is to reintroduce it as one of the worst forms of child labor, and in order to bring attention to its impact on children. We commit to protecting children from SEC, and we shall continue to encourage and promote youth advocacy involvement through webinars and of course our other work exploring SEC, and to encourage and embrace discussions emphasizing SEC as a worst form of child labor. So that is our resolution for today, and we hope that over time we can build on that resolution and make it even stronger. And we invite members of the audience in their own sphere of influence to take such resolutions forward and to put it on the agenda, including organizations such as the ILO. And they, of course, don't speak for the entire world. They simply speak for a particular perspective. And as a result, we all need to bring our perspectives to the table. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Walleen. And I think I will echo what you said. We should put this into practice in every day of our lives, and every step we take, you know, by living it out, whatever we are speaking today, whatever we are talking about today, you know, just it starts with us, and it starts with us being able to remember this every day and being able to apply this to our personal lives and to our personal circles, and hopefully to a larger group of audience. Thank you so much, Walleen. I think it's time to hand it over to the Dean of UKZN for some closing remarks, I believe. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, if I may say that we just have the vote of thanks from Dr. Bridget Clark on behalf of the School of Law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I could just conclude with the wonderful words of Gracia Michelle. She said, if we are here in solidarity with this beauty of unity in our pain, we have to pledge to do something to make this country and these countries, Kenya, India, the Philippines, countries which are safe for children. I think those words echo exactly what we've heard today, the resonance of the laws are there, but the lack of implementation, parental negligence, poverty, corruption, peer pressure, social media, all these things have come through so very strongly here today. And I would like to express our deepest thanks to our partners at Terre des Hommes, our wonderful facilitator today, Louise Mariana, Mrs. Magdalene Wanzer, the country officer from Kenya, des Hommes in the Netherlands, her two colleagues who conceptualized and side-the-side event, Ms. Jean Elphick and Beata Staffers Kopinski. Special thanks to the NGO partners in Kenya, the Philippines and India, Ms. Dorcas Mawachi, Ms. Tipamaran Juyenya, and Ms. Pamela A. Special thanks, special thanks to our youth participants. And I think from what I saw in the comments and generally from our participants, we were very moved by the voices of Maggie and Helena, of Nehru and Amu from India, and Shane and Alexa from the Philippines. Incredible resonance coming through from them, many of them echoing what the others have said, the influence, the effects of poverty and peer pressure and parental negligence, the desire for just proper implementation, proper protection of the laws. And lastly, I'd like to thank our colleagues at UKZN organizing this event, Ms. Rowena Bernard for her wonderful starting speech as well, Advocate Victoria Balogun-Fatigan and her wonderful insights and work on this presentation. And then lastly, from our UKZN group, Dr. Leon Holness, who's worked tirelessly to put this presentation together. And they all members, including myself, of the Navi Pillay Research Group and the Children's Rights Research Interest Group. And lastly, our PhD student, Ms. Amabaka Ogudwanda, for her wonderful words. And then my final expression of gratitude are to thank Hazel Langer and Kurt Conning from Corporate Relations for their support of the event. And I think we really resonate with the real desire to end poverty, end parental negligence, and bring these voices to the fore, end cultural practices which hide the voices of children, child marriage, and finally the desperate need for implementation and enforcement of these laws and resolutions which we've discussed today. Thank you all so very, very much from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Well done, youth advocates.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Next time.
Hazel, thank you.
Thank you, Louise. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.